GCC central banks followed the U.S. Federal Reserve and raised interest rates by a quarter of a percentage point today for the first time since 2018. But price pressures in this region aren't as severe as in the U.S., where inflation is at its highest in 4 decades. We're joined by the head of macroeconomic analysis at EFG Hermes Research, Mohammed Abu Basha. Thanks so much for joining us today. Now that GCC central banks have raised their interest rates, how will businesses in this region react?
Well, I think, it's just a small hike that I guess would not necessarily have a big impact on the recovery, which is a strong one happening in terms of in light of the recovery from the pandemic. In addition, obviously, there's the higher oil price, which boosts confidence and potentially can boost some additional government spending. I think what will matter more is like how much really further of rate hikes the Gulf central banks are willing to hike. I mean, how much are they really going to match in terms of, at least from the US Fed's perspective, another 6 hikes this year? I guess that would be the more interesting question to watch.
So let's come back to that in just a moment. But how much do you think banks are going to benefit from this higher interest rate?
I think definitely banks are a net beneficiary. They tend to. There's going to be a rise in their asset yields in terms of tradable securities. They're going to charge more for their loans. So definitely they're a net beneficiary of this decision.
And the broader implications of this rate hike and these successive rate hikes for this year and 2023 for this region?
I think that's a challenge that central banks will have to to decide. I mean, there's the balance of, as you've mentioned, inflationary pressures in this region might not be as acute or as sharp as they are in more developed economies, in particular the US in that case. So how many of those hikes will the regional central banks match? I think that's going to be an important question for the strength of the recovery, because if we see obviously successive rate hikes, that could be a bit of a headwind facing the ongoing recovery.
But traditionally, central banks in this region follow the Fed's rate hikes. So what do you anticipate will happen?
I think we've seen at some intervals that they don't necessarily fully match the increases, so they also have to look at their own domestic economic conditions. There's always a limit because with obviously the existing pegs, there has to be consideration for the attractiveness of the local currency. There has to be some balance that is taken into consideration. But I think at some point, with the different projections of the economic cycle and the inflationary pressures, I think I would expect that at some point there will be a bit of not fully matching the increases that's going to happen from the Fed.
Okay, we will wait and see. Thanks so much for joining us. Head of Macroeconomic Analysis at EFG Hermes Research, Mohammed Abu Basha.